Hey people, this is Buddy Brown. He's got a fairly large channel, 1.22 million subscribers. He's a redneck from North Mississippi. He's Southern Baptist, you know that because 95% of the population North Mississippi is Southern Baptist. And I'm not subscribed, but he comes up in my recommendations all the time, so I watch his movies. And I agree with most of what he says. But there's always something in his flick that lets me know that he lacks the ability to think for himself. But he's a good old dude. You send your children over there to have a sleepover with his kids, and you could trust your children in his house. He's just a good old dude. You go fishing with him, and it looks like you go drinking with him too. He's not scared of the Jack Daniels. But he just put up this video, and he's talking about this Muslim leader. And he goes into a shop over here in Houston, and he says, "Y'all are Muslim?" "Yes, sir." And he says, "Well, I'm going to give you 30 days to quit selling the alcohol, tobacco, and pork. You know Muslims don't do that. If you don't quit within 30 days, we're going to picket your store and you're not going to like it." And so old Buddy's got to point out about how just awful this is. That he's going to go into a store and he's going to threaten them that their Muslims are going to picket him if they don't quit selling alcohol, tobacco, and pork. And he's using this to point out how terrible the Muslims are. But yeah, in Mississippi we do love our pork. And he lays the story out as, these poor people, they're just trying to make a living and feed their children, and trying to run a store. But I'm a lot more open-minded than him, I look at the other side. Maybe if I was in Mississippi and I was trying to run my store and I serve abortions, the Southern Baptists would do the same thing to me. They would come in and say, "You got to shut this down." They wouldn't give me 30 days. They'd tell me, "You got to shut it down right now." And his picketers would already be out there doing their thing. And if that didn't work, they'd start throwing rocks through my windows. They'd try to talk all my customers out. And sometimes they even throw a bomb through your window. So there's not that much of a difference between Christianity and Muslim. They both have holy books that none of the parishioners can read, so they just have faith that their leaders can read this and are giving them a correct interpretation. But they're all too lazy to figure out how to read their own holy books. It's the same thing with the Quran. They can't read it. Everywhere you go, they all have a different interpretation. And this has been going on forever. It's been going on long before Jesus, and I'm fixing to prove that right now. The Muslims, they believe that Muhammad was the last prophet of God, and he talked to the angels, and they gave him this book to write. And the Christians, they believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and this was the symbol of Jesus Christ, the Chiro. And so there's a different bloodline of the Son of Christ here if you look into this Chiro. It almost looks like a patah. This is the old T. But they say this is the R and an X here, or XR. It was called the Christogram. And you'd find it in writings off to the side. If something was important, they would put this Christogram off the side of it. And they'll tell you that Constantine adopted it in the 4th century AD as part of his military standard, when he had a dream that he should carry a powerful symbol into war, into battle with him, and this is the one he selected. And you see it on this old commemorative coin. You see it on the shield here. But when you saw this symbol on the margin of a page, it was called a Christian. Meant good. And you can see it on some coins of Ptolemy. Patah, PT. Is that a PT or is it a RX? And back in 246 BC. You can see it on this old coin. It was printed from 246 to 222 BC. And you see it here. The eagle has, I think they call it a censer. Means the power. And the Chiro sitting between his legs here. But this Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt. Ptolemay, Ptolemies. And it ruled Egypt from 305 BC until 30 BC. They'll say that the last pharaoh was Cleopatra. And when I say Cleopatra, Cleopatra is the queen. It wasn't a one person. There were many Cleopatras. There were many Ptolemies. This is the king, this is the queen. You see, they just had a couple names that they shared. Ptolemy, Bernice, Cleopatra, and Arsinoe. And you'll see down here on the tree, these are the names. And Ptolemy's sign was the Chi-Rho, the sign of Christianity, the good, the Christian. And they kept it all up in the family, same as Egypt. And the king would marry his brother's daughter, but it all stayed between these Ptolemies and Bernices and Arsinoes. But these names had meaning. And you see it in the hieroglyph of Cleopatra, which is here. It's a Cle, a Q, L-A-O, a Cle, attached from, a Clea, and Padra, not Patra, but P-D-R-A, a Padra, the father. And then the et symbol, the feminine, the Cleo, attached, the father, et, feminine. You see it on all the Egyptian names. The father, the god, would be here, and the et would be the feminine counterpart. And so Cleopatra was a man's name, and this is Cleopatra et. So it seemed like this Ptolemaic dynasty, when it ended with Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony around 30 BC. And it seems like must be one of these sons of Julius Caesar or Mark Antony and Cleopatra that I got it from my daddy, that came back with the sign of the Christian, the sign of Ptolemy, always and forever, they say this means. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar had a son, and he was Ptolemy, and he ruled with mother. And Cleopatra also had some children with Mark Antony, which she also had a Ptolemy. And her daughter, Cleopatra, also had a son of Ptolemy. And so this looks like to be the bloodline of the king and the queens, the kings and the queens. And so, Cleopatra, that's what that means. I got it from my daddy, Et. I believe that was the Natchez Indians that did that. They would have the great moon, the mother moon, and then the great sun. And so the king would rule with his mother, and then he would pass it down to his daughter, and she would pass it down to her son. And that's what this Cleopatra and Ptolemy mean. These are the lines, and Cleopatra, Mark Antony passed down to Cleopatra. From Cleopatra it went to Ptolemy, and then it'd go back to Cleopatra and Ptolemy. This Ptolemy Philadelphus over here, Philadelphus, that's love thy brother. So he was Greek. But back in the day, to be Christian had a whole different meaning. It meant, hey, this is a particularly valuable or relevant passage in the margin of the page. It means read this, pay attention to this, Christian. This is good information. Look into it. Don't believe what you are told. You better pay attention to what this says. So for thousands of years now, they've been killing off all the free thinkers, and they've been breeding people that just do what they're told and believe what they're told. And that's why we're in this position today, where we got Christians and Muslims that can't read their own holy book and just have faith that their government wouldn't lie to them. And nobody wants to hear the cure. But if you feel like you couldn't be a good person if you didn't believe in a great God that loves you and watches over you, then you're a faulty human being, and you probably shouldn't have children. You know, the only way to cure this, you got to get rid of all your government and religion and let the animals breed and let the strong survive again. Otherwise, we're just going to be in a de-evolution. We're all going to fall back to monkeys. You know, that's why they're trying to phase out the white man now. So, oh, Buddy Brown, you know, you a good old dude. I like you. But belief is for the weak. You got to look into what you're talking about. You got to know what you're talking about. And there's very few of them today, you know. If you want to know whether you can believe what somebody's saying, look how many subscribers they got. What you got is about 10 billion sheep and less than 100,000 people who could think for themselves. And I'm going to cut this off here. Good day.